Treason is not the reason for the season. Episode 18, Natural right to self-defense is not a constitutional right to self-destruct. Or, there is no liberty without law. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Declaration of Independence, 1776. These few words shows the natural right of equality, of life, of liberty, of freedom. Everyone naturally has these rights. And these few words also show that the only way to secure these rights is to institute a government of the people, for the people, by the people. Jefferson got these words from men before him. In 1765, Voltaire wrote, "Equality is therefore both the most natural of things." In 1690, John Locke wrote that men are born equal and have a right to life, liberty, and property. Voltaire said that equality is a natural right. Locke said that we are naturally endowed, with the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. But the natural rights to life, liberty, and property by themselves becomes meaningless the moment they run into a murderer, a slave owner, or a thief. In 1748, Baron de Montesquieu wrote, "All men are born equal. Society makes them lose it, and they recover it only by the protection of the law." In 1762, Jean-Jacques Rousseau wrote, "However unequal in strength and intelligence, men become equal by covenant and by right." Montesquieu said that we are all naturally equal, but thieves, thugs, and threats make us lose that equality. And the only way we can get that equality back is by protection of the law. Rousseau said that we each have differences in individual power, but that we become equals by covenant, by binding agreement, by declarations and constitutions ratified by us all, and by ratifying those documents that declare our rights, and establish a government to protect those rights become defensible, and therefore become real. We have natural rights like equality, like the right to life, liberty, and happiness. We generally accept these rights as self-evident, as not even needing to be proven. But these natural rights exist as a Platonic ideal, as philosophical theory. They may be natural rights, but nature doesn't enforce them. And when the Platonic ideal of natural rights meets Aristotle's realism of the physical world wins. You have the natural right to life, liberty, and happiness, but the moment you run into a warlord with their own private army, the warlord wins. When the theory of natural rights meets a murderer, the murderer wins. But it's even worse than that. When the philosophical theory of natural rights meets any large group of real flesh and blood people, those rights evaporate into nothingness. The founders did not see good people and evil people. The founders saw everyone as flawed. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. James Madison. All men would be tyrants if they could. Abigail Adams. The founders saw flawed people with no government at all as inevitable anarchy and mob violence. In the face of lawlessness, natural rights are vaporized by the book-burning bonfires. In the face of mob violence, natural rights are trampled by vigilantes and self-righteous crusades. The only way to secure the natural rights of equality, life, and liberty, is to submit ourselves to a government by us and for us. John Locke seemed to have understood this. Freedom then is not a liberty for everyone to do what he lists, to live as he pleases, and not to be tied by any laws. Liberty is to be free from restraint and violence from others. Liberty is not being free of laws. Liberty is being free from the violence of others. The Declaration of Independence plagiarizes Locke's sentiment. It says to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. The Declaration of Independence says that the only way to secure the natural rights of equality, the natural rights of life and liberty, is to form a government that protects these rights by covenant, and by force of law. This is exactly what the founders tried to do with the Constitution. We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. U.S. Constitution, ratified 1788. The founders took the natural rights of life, liberty, equality, and happiness from the ideal and attempted to establish and secure them, make them real, through the government they designed in the Constitution. And in forming a government, the individual rights translate into societal rights that the government should hold as their prime directive. Societal rights such as justice for all, domestic tranquility for all, promote the general welfare of all, provide for the common defense, the defense of all, and secure liberty for all. To secure the individual rights, the founders establish a government with liberty and justice for all. Or, as John Locke wrote, "Where there is no law, there is no freedom." And then, from a starting position that all people are flawed, that all people are susceptible to abuse power, the Founding Fathers tried to create a governmental system with many checks and balances to try and keep any one person's flaws from destroying the whole works. The Declaration of Independence, Constitution, and Bill of Rights establish some basic principles and ideals, and the Constitution creates a framework of government to make those principles real. Congress creates laws. The President enforces the laws. And the Supreme Court acts as a check to make sure the laws agree with the principles. One finds that while the Platonic ideal of natural rights is all very neat and clean, very precise and pure, things get quite messy the moment they meet Aristotle's reality. One of the first realities is that almost no right is absolute. Free speech? Great idea. However, the right to free speech does not protect you from inciting a riot with words, or using words to threaten someone that you are going to murder them, or calling in a bomb threat. It's speech, but it's not protected speech. Exactly where this line is between the ideal that is free speech, and the reality that is protected versus criminal behavior, is the job of the government as described in the Constitution. To secure the right of life and liberty, Congress, the President, and the Supreme Court have to figure out where the line is. See the earlier video about the difference between arbitrary and vague. Natural rights are vague. Legal rights have to choose arbitrary, objective, physical boundaries. That's the job of Congress. And the people, the voters, get to vote every once in a while as a way to steer the government, hopefully in the right direction. A representative government is only as good as its people. What is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? James Madison. If the people are flawed, so too is its government. Government is the only way to ever attempt to take the natural rights of people, and make them real for all people. But people are flawed and therefore government will be flawed. Government even in its best state, is but a necessary evil, Thomas Paine. We should not fall for the jingoism that every nation is tempted by, that our nation is superior to all others. Nor should we fall for the revisionism that the founders were these perfect specimens, who designed a perfect government. 49 of the 64 founding fathers owned slaves. The Constitution protected slavery, by protecting the importation of slaves for 20 years, by requiring fugitive slaves be returned to their owners, by the 3/5 THS Compromise giving slave states more seats in Congress, and by the Electoral College giving slave states more voting power to determine who becomes president. The Constitution isn't perfect. In fact, it enabled the subjugation of an entire race of people for nearly a century. At which point, the Civil War broke out and the South tried to subvert democracy with violence. And then the Constitution enabled the continued subjugation of blacks through Jim Crow's separate but equal. But the most important design of the Constitution was the right of the people to vote. And this right to vote is what allowed the nation, and the government that holds that nation together, to evolve from slavery and segregation to civil rights. After the Civil War, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment overturned the Supreme Court's Dred Scott ruling, granting blacks the right to citizenship, and demanded that states provide equal protection under the law for all people, not just citizens. The 15th mandated that blacks had the right to vote. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. This is an idea that goes all the way back to Theodore Parker, a Unitarian minister and abolitionist who just 8 years before the Civil War wrote a sermon that divined that slavery would eventually be abolished. This idea of a moral universe would be repeated by several people over many years, including Martin Luther King Jr. in 1958, who was one of the biggest forces behind the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act being passed just a few years later. As people grow and evolve, so too does their government. All of this is a very long-winded way of saying government is complicated. You've got natural rights such as equality, but you also have a constitution written by people who were mostly slave owners. And while that constitution protected slavery, it also allowed for the nation to grow, to improve, to evolve, through the right to vote. And it is that right to vote that, in the long run, changed the very constitution and the laws of the land to outlaw slavery and move the nation from espousing the Platonic ideal of equality while owning slaves, to a nation espousing the Platonic ideal of equality where the laws mandate equal rights and equal protections from the racists who are still hanging on to the hope of starting a race war. Montesquieu wrote, "The government must be such that one citizen is not afraid of another citizen." This is the primary goal of government, to take those natural rights and establish and secure them to as many people as possible, knowing that some people are working against those rights. The Declaration of Independence has inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and equality. The preamble to the Constitution that states the government's purpose is to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty. Turning a natural right into a legal right requires finding a balance between the individual wanting to exercise some right versus the impact that individual might have on justice for everyone else. The government will have to balance the individual right versus the impact that individual might have on domestic tranquility. If you go up to someone and say, "I'm going to murder you," that might be speech, but it isn't necessarily free speech. Your right to swing your fist ends at my nose. And it's the job of government to draw the line, legally, between what is a right and what is criminal behavior. People have a natural right to life and liberty. And from there, one can imply a natural right to self-defense. But translating that natural right to self-defense into a legal right, means the government must balance the individual right to self-defense with the societal right to justice for all. The natural right to self-defense does not automatically grant a legal right unlimited firepower. The natural right to self-defense does not translate into a legal right to carry brass knuckles, Molotov cocktails, bayonets, assault rifles, machine guns, silencers, hand grenades, and shoulder-launched missiles. The natural right to self-defense does not mean a legal right to self-destruct the rest of society. The natural right to self-defense is only secured through government, and the role of government is to secure the individual rights in balance with justice for all. Government must balance the individual with the general welfare. Government must balance the personal right with domestic tranquility for all. Natural rights are Platonic ideals, they can exist in pure, but hypothetical form. Legal rights are grounded in political realities. Legal rights almost always come from political compromises between different sides. Legal rights have to find a specific place to draw the line between individual right and criminal behavior, and that line must balance the personal rights with societal rights. If it doesn't, if the law holds a personal right as an absolute, to be exercised by an individual no matter how terrible the cost might be to society, then that is no better than lawlessness. It is no better than anarchy. If your right to swing your fist is absolute, then you have the right to punch me in the nose without cause, without reason, without provocation. And then people like me have to live in fear of people like you wanting to swing their fists. And this fails Montesquieu's reason for government's existence. The government must be such that one citizen is not afraid of another citizen. Natural rights might sound absolute, but legal rights never are. Because an absolute right doesn't concern itself with the cost to society, the terror to society. But a legal right, established by a government mandated to establish and secure liberty and justice for all, must balance the individual right with the cost to society. There is no liberty without law. Without law, without government, you have anarchy. An anarchy, with a single bad actor, gives you mob violence. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. James Madison. All men would be tyrants if they could. Abigail Adams. Or to use the contemporary version, no justice, no peace. This seems like a simple enough concept. But the Nunn v. Georgia case got this completely wrong, which will be covered in the next video. Treason is not the reason for the Second Amendment. Treason is not the reason for the season.